wind 050 at 8, runway 33, clear to land.
For land 33. We're good, weather update.
Affirmative, new information that I had just put out about 9 minutes ago. Visibility is 3/4, light snow, indefinite ceiling 1,200.
On the evening of January 25th, 2026, a Bombardier Challenger 650 accelerated down runway 33 at Bangor International Airport in Maine. Within minutes, the aircraft lay inverted in the snow, engulfed in flames. According to airport officials, all 6 people aboard were presumed dead. The tower had reported light snow, but audio evidence suggests something far more dangerous may have been falling from the sky. Ice pellets that could render standard de-icing protection inadequate. When I analyzed the ATC recordings and eyewitness audio from this accident, one detail stood out: a sound pilots who've flown in Arctic conditions know all too well. Understanding what happened that night might prevent the next cold weather tragedy. Bangor International Airport sits about 240 miles north of Boston, a strategic refueling stop for transatlantic flights. On January 25, 2026, a major winter storm was hammering New England. By evening, visibility at Bangor had dropped to 3/4 of a mile, with temperatures plunging to 2 degrees Fahrenheit. At approximately 6:09 p.m., Bombardier Challenger 650 N10KJ landed at Bangor, arriving from Houston Hobby Airport. The jet, registered to a Houston-based company, was on the first leg of a journey to an airport near Paris. According to the flight manifest, 6 people were aboard. The plan was to refuel, de-ice, and continue across the Atlantic. The Challenger 650 is a wide-body business jet typically configured for 9 to 11 passengers. This particular aircraft, tail number N10KJ, had just completed the flight from Houston without reported problems during that leg. Bangor's runway 33 is a wide runway, more than adequate for a Challenger's performance envelope. The airport remained open despite the storm. Commercial and private aircraft were landing and departing. De-icing operations were active. First responders were on standby for weather-related incidents. To the crew of N10KJ, this appeared to be a routine winter refueling stop before the long oceanic crossing. Within 90 minutes, everyone aboard would be dead. After landing, the crew taxied to the de-icing pad. Audio from liveatc.net captured the pilot requesting wing and tail treatment. This is standard procedure in winter precipitation. The aircraft was treated with de-icing fluid designed to remove existing contamination and provide temporary protection against further accumulation. Type 1 fluid is heated and removes snow, frost, or ice already adhered to surfaces. Type 4 fluid is thicker and gel-like, providing holdover time protection. As the aircraft moves and air flows over the wing during takeoff, this fluid spreads evenly, preventing precipitation from adhering during the critical acceleration phase. The Challenger remained at the de-icing pad for approximately 20 minutes, according to ATC recordings. This timing becomes crucial later. At the same time, other crews were making different decisions. About 30 minutes before N10KJ's attempted departure, an Allegiant Airlines flight bound for Florida aborted its takeoff. The Allegiant crew returned to the gate, reporting 2 critical problems. First, their de-icing fluid had failed. Contamination was visible on the wings despite treatment. Second, visibility had deteriorated beyond acceptable limits. On a separate frequency, not monitored by Tower or the Challenger crew, a Breeze Airways pilot using the call sign Moxie contacted the Allegiant crew. The Breeze pilot wanted to know what had happened at the end of the runway. The Allegiant pilot's response would prove prophetic. According to reports, the Allegiant pilot explained they had failed their pre-contamination check. This is a final visual inspection pilots conduct just before taking the active runway. A last look at the wings to confirm de-icing protection is still effective and no contamination has accumulated during taxi. The Allegiant crew had gone to the runway threshold, looked back at their wings, and found the de-icing treatment had been compromised. But the pilot reportedly added something else. He described precipitation at the end of the runway that had adhered to the aircraft as if no de-icing protection was present. This was not a description of ordinary snow. Snow can be managed with proper de-icing. This suggested something more insidious. Ice pellets. Ice pellets are frozen precipitation distinct from snowflakes. They form when raindrops fall through sub-freezing air and freeze into solid ice before reaching the ground. Unlike snow, which is crystalline and relatively light, ice pellets are dense, hard, and adhesive. When they strike a cold metal surface like an aircraft wing at 2 degrees Fahrenheit, they can adhere almost instantly. Even advanced de-icing fluids can struggle against heavy ice pellet contamination. For pilots unfamiliar with operating in extreme cold, the ice pellets can be mistaken for ordinary snow. The consequences of that misidentification can be fatal. At 7:45 p.m., tower cleared N10KJ for takeoff on runway 33. According to ATC Communications, the controller provided current conditions: good visibility on the runway visual range, light crosswinds from the right. The controller reported light snow. The pilot acknowledged the clearance. The Challenger began its takeoff roll. Approximately 2.5 minutes later, a controller's voice erupted over the frequency. All traffic is stopped on the field. All traffic is stopped on the field. Moments after, another controller transmitted, aircraft upside down. We have a passenger aircraft upside down. The airport immediately shut down. Emergency vehicles raced to the scene. According to preliminary reports and witness accounts, the aircraft became inverted on or near the runway and caught fire. Images from the scene show landing gear pointing skyward. The fuselage burned and crumpled. First responders arrived within a minute, according to airport officials, but there was nothing they could do. The FAA's preliminary notice stated the crash occurred under unknown circumstances. One preliminary account described the aircraft appearing unstable almost immediately after liftoff, then rolling onto its back. The fire consumed the wreckage quickly. All 6 people aboard were presumed dead. Airport officials confirmed there were no survivors transported from the scene. The data available so far is limited. The NTSB has assigned the case number CEN26FA098 and dispatched investigators to the scene. A preliminary report is expected within 30 days. The final report, which will include cockpit voice recorder and flight data recorder analysis, will take 12 to 24 months. But certain pieces of evidence are already available, and they raise questions about a critical environmental factor the crew may not have fully recognized. Local news station News 8 obtained Ring doorbell audio from a residence near the airport. The audio captured the moment of the crash, a distant impact sound followed by a dog barking. But there's something else in the recording that some analysts have noted, a distinct sound in the background that experienced cold weather pilots might recognize. That sound has characteristics consistent with ice pellets striking hard surfaces, not the soft patter of snow, but a harder, crackling sound. Pilots who have operated extensively in Arctic or subarctic conditions can distinguish between snow and ice pellets by sound alone. Ice pellets create a distinctive acoustic signature when hitting windscreens, microphones, and pavement. If this interpretation is correct, it would suggest the precipitation was not benign snow. Ice pellets present a contamination threat that exceeds snow by an order of magnitude. If the crew of N10KJ was unfamiliar with ice pellets, if their experience base was primarily in warmer climates, they may have looked at the falling precipitation, heard the tower report light snow, and believed they were operating within the protection envelope of their de-icing treatment. That assessment, if it occurred, would have been tragically wrong. 2 primary theories have emerged among aviation analysts examining this accident. The first theory focuses on wing contamination during takeoff. In this scenario, ice pellets or other frozen precipitation accumulated on the wings during the taxi from the de-icing pad to the runway or during the brief period at the runway threshold. The de-icing fluid, designed primarily to protect against snow, may have been overwhelmed by the adhesive properties of ice pellets. As the aircraft accelerated and the wings began generating lift, the contamination disrupted airflow over the wing's upper surface. The Bombardier Challenger 600 series has a swept wing design, which is efficient at high speeds, but sensitive to leading-edge contamination. If one wing stalled before the other due to asymmetric ice accumulation, the aircraft would have experienced a sudden roll. At rotation speed with insufficient altitude to recover, the roll would have been uncontrollable. The aircraft would have inverted and impacted the runway or adjacent ground. This theory is consistent with preliminary accounts suggesting the aircraft appeared unstable shortly after liftoff. It's consistent with the rapid roll described in some reports, and it's consistent with the Allegiant crew's experience just minutes earlier, de-icing treatment failing in the face of severe contamination. The FAA issued an airworthiness directive in 2008, specifically warning Challenger 600 operators about cold weather operations and takeoff safety following 3 incidents in Canada. That directive required enhanced warnings in the flight manual. The second theory considers a runway excursion during a rejected takeoff. In this scenario, the crew recognized a problem during the takeoff roll. Perhaps an engine anomaly, a control issue, or visible contamination on the wings observed through cockpit windows. They attempted to reject the takeoff, applying brakes and possibly reverse thrust. But runway 33, despite its length, was contaminated with snow and ice. Braking action would have been significantly reduced. If the aircraft departed the prepared runway surface at high speed, the gear could have dug into snow or soft ground, causing a cartwheel or rollover. The fire would have started upon impact when fuel tanks ruptured. This theory is less consistent with preliminary accounts suggesting the aircraft became airborne and rolled. But it cannot be ruled out until investigators examine the wreckage, runway surface, and flight data recorder. The FDR will show thrust settings, control inputs, brake application, and ground speed throughout the sequence. The cockpit voice recorder will reveal whether the crew recognized contamination, discussed rejecting the takeoff, or attempted emergency procedures after liftoff. Without that data, both theories remain viable. But the weight of available preliminary evidence leans toward the contamination and asymmetric stall scenario. A third, less discussed possibility involves a mechanical failure coinciding with environmental stress. Jet engines can experience ice ingestion or mechanical issues in extreme cold. Control surfaces can become sluggish or restricted if moisture infiltrates actuators and freezes. However, the Challenger had just landed successfully from Houston without reported issues during that portion of the flight. The aircraft had been on the ground for roughly 90 minutes, long enough for any frost or ice to form on cold-soaked fuel in the wings, but the de-icing treatment should have addressed visible contamination. A dual-engine failure on takeoff is exceedingly rare and would likely produce different observations: less rolling, more of a settling back to the runway, or an inability to accelerate. An isolated control problem, severe enough to cause an uncontrollable roll, is also rare and typically produces warnings the crew would have communicated to tower. The NTSB investigation will examine maintenance records, engine teardowns, and control system integrity. Investigators will determine whether the engines were producing rated thrust at impact, whether flight controls were functioning, and whether any pre-existing mechanical deficiencies contributed. But absent evidence of a catastrophic mechanical failure, environmental factors remain a primary focus of analysis. Converging on the most probable scenario means weighing all available preliminary evidence. The Allegiant crew reported a de-icing failure shortly before N10KJ's departure. They described severe contamination adhering despite treatment. Audio evidence has been interpreted by some as consistent with ice pellets falling at the time of the crash. The tower reported light snow, which may have led the Challenger crew to believe conditions were manageable. Weird preliminary accounts suggest the aircraft lifted off or attempted to lift off before inverting, consistent with a wing stall. The Challenger 600 series has a documented history of sensitivity to cold weather contamination, serious enough to warrant a 2008 FAA directive. What the NTSB will likely focus on: the time elapsed between de-icing and takeoff, which determines whether holdover time was exceeded; the crew's cold weather experience and training, whether a pre-contamination check was performed, weather observation accuracy and communication, and whether the crew understood the specific type of precipitation they were encountering. Investigators will also examine company procedures for winter operations, pressure to depart on schedule, and whether the crew felt they had the option to delay or cancel the flight. But the cockpit voice recorder will reveal the crew's situational awareness in the final minutes, whether they recognized the threat they were facing, and whether they had time to react. But there's something else worth examining about this accident. It's the human factors element, the chain of decisions that led to 6 people being on that runway in those conditions. The crew had options. They could have waited for the weather to improve. They could have stayed overnight in Bangor. They could have consulted with the Allegiant crew to learn what they had experienced. But they didn't hear the Allegiant Breeze conversation. It happened on a separate frequency. They heard the tower report light snow, not ice pellets. And they may have been operating under schedule pressure, the expectation that the aircraft would reach Paris on time. I'd worry that passengers would make connections or appointments, that the weather was within operational limits because the airport was open and other aircraft were departing. This is the insidious nature of aviation accidents. They rarely result from a single catastrophic failure. They result from a chain of small decisions, each seemingly reasonable in isolation. The airport was open. De-icing was complete. The tower said light snow. The runway was long. Other aircraft were operating. Any one of those facts taken alone suggests normalcy. Taken together in the presence of a threat the crew may not have recognized, they can become a fatal combination. Break one link in that chain and everyone survives. Inside the cockpit of N10KJ during those final minutes, the workload was intense. While the crew was managing a night departure in instrument meteorological conditions with active precipitation, they were coordinating with ground control tower and likely monitoring company frequency. They were configuring the aircraft for takeoff, setting flaps, verifying engine parameters, confirming flight management system inputs for the oceanic crossing. They were cross-checking each other's actions, following checklists, and maintaining situational awareness of traffic, weather, and runway conditions. This is routine work for professional pilots, but it requires focus and discipline. There's little spare cognitive capacity for resolving ambiguous threats. If ice pellets were falling and the crew had limited experience with ice pellet conditions, they had no experiential template to recognize the specific threat. Simulator training focuses on mechanical emergencies, engine failures, fires, decompression. It rarely replicates the subtle creeping threat of wing contamination from unfamiliar precipitation types. The crew may have performed a visual check of the wings and seen de-icing fluid still present, unaware that ice pellets could be adhering beneath or through the fluid layer. The decision to take the runway was made with incomplete information under time pressure in conditions that appeared manageable, but may not have been. This is the gap between training and reality, between what pilots prepare for and what they face. The Bombardier Challenger 600 series, including the 650 variant, is a proven business jet with thousands of examples in operation worldwide, but the type has a documented history with cold weather takeoff contamination. The 2008 FAA Airworthiness Directive referenced 3 incidents in Canada where Challenger 600 series aircraft experienced control difficulties or accidents related to winter weather and takeoff contamination. The directive required operators to add specific warnings to the flight manual about cold weather operations. The swept wing design, while efficient for high-speed cruise, is less forgiving of leading-edge contamination than straight wing designs. Even a thin layer of ice or frost can disrupt laminar flow and precipitate a stall at speeds well above the wing's clean stall speed. N10KJ was a Challenger 650, one of the later and more advanced variants in the Challenger 600 family. Federal records link the aircraft to a Houston-based company, and reports suggest it was used for corporate transportation. The specific age and maintenance history of this aircraft have not been publicly released as of this writing. Investigation into the aircraft's maintenance logs, inspection records, and recent service history is ongoing. The NTSB will examine whether any mechanical issues existed prior to the accident and whether all required inspections and maintenance had been completed. Systemic factors in this accident extend beyond the cockpit. Weather reporting at airports relies on automated systems and human observers, but ice pellets can be difficult to distinguish from snow, especially at night in low visibility. If the tower was reporting light snow based on automated sensor data or visual observation, that report may have been technically accurate for the airport terminal area, but not representative of conditions at the runway threshold. Localized weather phenomena, particularly in snowstorms, can create microenvironments with significantly different precipitation types within the same airport boundary. Pilots depend on accurate weather information to make go/no-go decisions. If the information they receive underrepresents the threat, their decision-making is compromised. Operational pressure is another systemic factor. While there is no evidence the crew of N10KJ faced explicit pressure to depart, the broader aviation culture often rewards timely operations. Delaying or canceling a flight due to weather that other aircraft are operating in can feel like an overreaction, even when it's the safest choice. The fact that the airport was open, that de-icing was available, and that other flights were moving may have created an implicit expectation that departure was both possible and expected. Questioning that expectation requires confidence and experience. What should pilots learn from this tragedy? First, understand that not all winter precipitation is the same. Snow, freezing rain, ice pellets, and freezing fog each present different contamination threats. Ice pellets are particularly dangerous because they adhere aggressively and can overwhelm standard de-icing protection. If you hear a hard, crackling sound on your windscreen or fuselage, not the soft patter of snow, consider the possibility of ice pellets and treat them as a serious contamination threat. Second, perform a pre-contamination check before taking the active runway. Walk to the back of the cabin if possible, and visually inspect the wings. If you see any roughness, discoloration, or visible contamination, do not take off. Return for another de-icing treatment. Third, be aware of holdover times. De-icing fluid provides protection for a limited period, depending on temperature and precipitation intensity. That time starts when treatment is complete, not when you take the runway. If you've been delayed by traffic or other factors, your holdover time may have expired. Fourth, if other crews are rejecting takeoffs or returning to the gate due to contamination, pay attention. Their experience is your warning. Fifth, when in doubt, don't go. The pressure to depart is real, but it's never worth 6 lives. Aviation is unforgiving of the smallest mistakes, and winter operations demand the highest level of caution. 6 people were aboard N10KJ that night. As of this writing, their identities have not been fully released publicly, pending final identification and family notification. What we know is that they boarded an aircraft expecting a routine transatlantic flight. They trusted the crew, the aircraft, and the systems designed to keep them safe. They had families, plans, and futures. All of that ended in seconds on a snow-covered runway in Maine. We owe them more than sympathy. We owe them a thorough investigation that identifies every factor that contributed to this accident. We owe them procedural changes, training improvements, and cultural shifts that prevent the next crew from making the same decisions. We owe them honesty about what happened and why. The NTSB's preliminary report will be available within 30 days by searching the investigation's database with case number CEN26FA098. The final report will take 12 to 24 months. As those reports are released, we'll return to this accident with updated analysis. If you're a pilot, particularly one operating in winter conditions, follow this investigation closely. The lessons learned here could save your life and the lives of your passengers. Aviation safety advances one accident at a time, written in tragedy, but built on the determination that it will not happen again.